welcome to our adult ed time, our faith-seeking understanding time. And last week I was delighted, and we were delighted to welcome Kody Russell from Kitsap Strong, who has presented some wonderful, amazing, interesting research around adverse childhood experiences. If you did not see the presentation last week, please go to my YouTube channel, which is PB''S Teaching, and you can view that, as that'll be really helpful. Not that you can't plug in today if you weren't here last week at all, but that'll be really helpful for you, and know that that's there. So today we get to think about the so what, and kind of work into what do we do with this research, and so we're just delighted to have Kody back, and so welcome again.
Thank you so much. Again, thank you guys for this opportunity. All right, well thank you. Again, my name is Kody Russell, and I'm the project director for Kitsap Strong, which is a new local initiative focused on preventing adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, in our community, and building resiliency for everyone in our community. And it's funded by the combined efforts of the Suquamish Tribe, the United Way, Kitsap Community Foundation, Kitsap Public Health District, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So we got a lot to cover today, so I'm just going to kind of jump into it. And just a show of hands, who was not here last week, just so I have a basic understanding. Okay, so you guys will hopefully be able to catch up and hang in. And again, I think there'd be a good opportunity to watch the conversation from last week. So for those who were here last week, anybody remember the difference between a routine challenge and an adaptive challenge? Did we have this conversation?
Yeah.
Okay. What is a routine challenge? Huh? Your car breaks down. Yes. So there's a process or procedure, and there's usually an expert involved. Right? So there's a process. Your house catches on fire, you call 911, right? Baking a cake, there's a process or procedure involved, and there's an expert involved. Your car breaks down, you call AAA, right? And then the other type of challenge that we know of is called an adaptive challenge. Adaptive challenges, there usually isn't a process or procedure, and there's no real expert, right? So again, we talked about this last time, this idea of parenting, or taking this information that I'm sharing with you today and applying it. There is no detailed roadmap that says if somebody has had 4 ACEs, then you do A, B, C, and D. And if they've had 3 ACEs, then you do G and F, right? That's not how it works. What we know and understand enough now about resiliency is that everybody benefits from it, but what we need to do depends on that individual, right? Depends on when they experience the traumatic incident, because that matters as far as where their brain was at in development. And it also matters, what are they good at? What do they value, right? And that we tailor our intervention and our support to their needs, to meet them at an individual level. And that requires learning. I have this term that I like, it's called empathic curiosity, right? It means that we need to be curious about the other. We need to really truly want to know someone else in order to be able to support them and offer them the best quality of care. But that needs to come from a place of empathy, meaning we really want to understand their feelings and connect with them and understand what they need and how best we can support them. Not from a place of just wanting to know, right? There's plenty of times where you just want to know what's going on with somebody, but it's not coming from that place of empathy, it's coming from that place of just genuine curiosity, right? Like, what's wrong with that individual? Anybody else feel that way sometimes, right? Like, what is going on? What makes that individual tick, right? And then the other concept that I wanted to remind us about is this idea of mental models. You guys remember the conversation around mental models? And I can't remember whether I shared the Jon Snow story about miasma. Okay, so mental models is our, if you use the image of an iceberg, right, most is underneath the waterline, right? And underneath the waterline is our values, assumptions, and our beliefs about how things work in our society, right? One quick example is during the cholera epidemic, there was a doctor named John Snow. The popular mental model and belief was that people were getting sick because they were breathing dirty air. Dirty air was making people sick. That's what was causing cholera, right? So the idea was, we've got to clean the air. So they start dumping bodies into the water. They're getting all these dead bodies on the land, right? They're trying to get them buried or put away so that the air will be clean and smell fresh, right? Well, John Snow's a doctor working in this little neighborhood, and he keeps getting these people all coming to him that are getting cholera. He's like, what is going on here, right? And everybody, all the other doctors are saying it's dirty air. And he said, maybe there's something else going on, because I'm working with all these people that are drinking from the same well. So he went to the well and he tested the water, right? What did he find in the well? They were throwing bodies and human waste in the well because they thought the air was what was making people sick, right? So they're drinking out of this well. And John Snow said, it's the water. So what did he do? He broke the pump, told everybody to stop drinking out of the water, and then told everybody else, hey, we've got to drink clean water. He saved hundreds of thousands of lives. By shifting the way that he looked at the situation, he saw new possibilities. The other thing that's important to understand about mental models is that they also influence how we think and feel about ourselves, right? Maybe we don't feel comfortable sharing it here, right? But I know that internal dialogue that goes on in our heads, some of us say things to ourselves that we would never say out loud to somebody else. Anybody else guilty of doing that? Right? Okay, yeah, I'm not alone here, right? Yeah. Well, so part of our mental model right now around people who've experienced trauma is that there's something inherently wrong with them. Right? Even the words and the language that we use, drug addict, crazy, right, delinquent, those words describe how we currently view people who've experienced trauma. And they also get internalized through this process of a mental model, and that's how we start to talk about ourselves. And that matters, right? So let's get into this information. And I did review all your guys' evaluations from last time, and I really appreciated it. And as I thought it would happen, we had half of you saying, I want to know more about neuroscience, half of you saying, I want to know more about resiliency. So I'm going to disappoint everybody today, and I'm going to offer a little bit about both, and that's just how it's going to be, okay? So again, we're talking about this Adverse Childhood Experiences study. Adverse Childhood Experiences study started in the early 1990s. Dr. Robert Anda and Dr. Vincent Felitti. And the reason I start off with this mental models conversation was that these were two doctors who'd spent a lifetime working with people who had health problems. Dr. Anda was a specialist focused on smoking-related health issues. And he was working with a population that desperately wanted to stop smoking. And he was trying all kinds of smoking cessation products and tasks to try and help them. Again, his mental frame was that people smoke cigarettes because they don't know that they kill them, right? And then they develop a disease and then they die early. So we have to educate people to stop smoking, right? Well, that works for some, but he had this population of people who just kept smoking, right? Despite knowing, and they would say, yeah, I know it's going to kill me, right? And then he met this doctor, Vincent Felitti, who was working with a group of predominantly women who were morbidly obese. And they were in a weight loss program, did phenomenally well, would lose lots of weight, leave the program, and gain the weight back and come back. And he was, why are my most successful clients the ones who continue to come back and continue to struggle with gaining weight? And they both started talking and they thought, hey, maybe there's something else going on here. And so that's where this whole body of research got going. For us, again, to really understand how trauma impacts us, we have to understand a little bit about our brains and bodies. So this is our nervous system, this is our brain, right? And it's connected through our peripheral nerves. It's giving us information about our internal body, right? Am I too hot? Am I sweating a lot? Right? What's going on here? And our external environment. What was that noise? What's going on? Are the lights too bright, right? Our brain is feeding us all this information. And in a microsecond, before we even recognize it, our brain is deciding what we should pay attention to, what gets filtered in, and what we shouldn't, what gets discounted away, right? Even the information coming in from our peripheral nerves all of it is filtered through one category, and that category is survival. So our brain's focus is keeping us alive. And we're born with the connections that we need to survive. What is a baby born with? What does a baby need to do in order to survive? Eat, sleep, cry, poop. Did I hear poop? Yep. Even if I don't hear the word, I always know when it's been said because there's a chuckle, right? We never get older than 12. I love it. I think we should, I'm going to stop doing this conversation, by the way, when an audience doesn't laugh at that. I'm just done, right? I just can't do this. Poop, right? And there's one other really important thing, right? Is this idea of being able to connect with another human. I don't know whether I shared it last time, but there's our infants, even at birth, we identify a human face unique to any other object in the world. We group the eyes, nose, and mouth together into one single symbol. Why would that be important? Why would we view faces different than any other object in the world? At birth, infants, you take a picture of a human face, turn it upside down, they still know it's a face. Why would that be important? Yeah.
Survival.
Survival. Because we know at birth that our survival is based on human connection. Right? An infant knows that they can't get their needs met. So they have to connect with somebody else, right? Our eyes are set up to focus only about this far away so that we can connect with our primary caregivers. And then we see here the rapid expansion of our brains and the dendrites. These are the little roots that connect our neurons, our cells in our brain. These dendrites are growing out, reaching out and expanding based on our experiences in our environment, right? So toddlers learn to walk and talk if caregivers in their environment are talking to them, encouraging physical development, encouraging them to go outside and play, right? And then here, during puberty, we see a process called pruning, life paths. On the top life path, we have little Johnny who's exposed to danger and chaos. He's growing up in a home where there's domestic violence, physical abuse, sexual abuse, right? So Johnny adapts to that environment and develops the skills and traits that helps him survive that environment. So what are some characteristics that you would anticipate developing if you were growing up in that environment? Let's shout them out. What would you do in order to keep yourself safe and survive?
Hide.
Hide. What else?
Run.
Hide and run. Yep. Anything else we see?
Do you feel less trusting?
Less trusting? Absolutely.
Shut down.
Yes, shut down.
Fight.
And fight, yep. We see the extremes on both of these, right? That either you're going to just kind of fold in on yourself or you're going to attack the world, right? You're going to either respond to everything as if it's dangerous, or you're so overwhelmed with filtering in everything through your brain, trying to pay attention to everything that's dangerous, you just get to the point where you just kind of disassociate, right? You just shut it all out. You just kind of get numb, right? And these would help us, right? And it's important that we adapt like that because it helps us as a species survive when conditions are really, really bad. On the other end of this spectrum, we're imagining another life journey, right? Is a little boy who grows up and there's safety and security. There's consistency. He cries, mom, dad, auntie, uncle, pick him up, rock him back and forth, change his diaper, feed him. His needs are met through people, right? So what does he learn to focus on? People and process, possibilities and relationships, right? This is the little boy who quickly learns that identifying the emotions of my caregiver and identifying the emotions of myself are important in my survival, right? Recognizing and bonding is important for my survival. Up here, using your words, that may not get your needs met, right? It's unlikely that using your words is getting your needs met when there is a lot of danger in your environment. Down here, absolutely. Words is how you get your needs met, right? And this is good because it helps us as a species survive when conditions are really good. I want to stop for a moment here and acknowledge that this again is hardwired into us. Long before we're conscious and able to remember our memories, right? If I asked you guys to say what's your earliest memory, right? Some of you would be able to go back to 5 years old, some of you 10 years old, right? But long before we're able to recall that memory, our body is storing that information. Our brain is adapting and remembering our experiences in our environment to help us survive. Right? So an example of this real quick. I had a woman share with me, she brings home her newborn, right? They just get home from the hospital, and her husband goes to sweep the floor. And as soon as that broom hits the floor, what did that baby do? Right? Startled. What did mom do? Oh, it's okay. Shh, it's okay. Right? We don't inherently know what to fear. Right? We learn what to fear through our caregiver's response and through our interactions with our primary caregiver. Right? So that little boy learned that, hey, that's not a fearful stimulus because my mom's there and my mom soothed me through that. Right? That's also how that little boy learns to regulate his own emotions, is by mirroring and watching how mom and dad respond. Now, I worked with another little 9-year-old boy when I was working in child welfare. His mom was driving the wrong way down I-5 because she was in the latest stages of anorexia. If you don't know, during the last stages of anorexia, your body will try to consume any and all calories it can. It starts to eat your own organs, including your brain. She had a psychotic break and thought that there were things chasing after her, so she's driving down I-5 the wrong direction, rush hour traffic, trying to get away from the voices, right? The police, luckily, were able to detain her, and they took the little boy and brought him into our office in child welfare. So we had a meeting that next morning, and this little 9-year-old boy is very articulate. It says, you know, I love my mom and I want her to be safe, but it's really scary living with her and I don't want to be with her right now. Right? This little boy said openly, it's like, I don't know what to fear, because I know I don't see the things that my mom sees, and I know she's talking to people that I don't see, but I'm starting to wonder if they're there. Right? So and this is how we start to see how sometimes mental illness can be an impact on us, on the children that are living in that home, right? Is that he's starting to learn what to fear based on his mom's responses to the environment, right? And those are hardwired into us. So the other thing I want to touch on here is that we don't inherently know what to hope for, right? So I had this experience the other day where a police officer was telling me in the first grade, the Cops and Kids program came in, walked in his front door. He's the police chief in Suquamish, and he said, I knew from the moment that guy walked in, that's what I wanted to do. And he's been a police chief for 30 years, right? He knew that that's what he wanted to do because he was exposed to that. His dreams are impacted by his experiences in his life. We talk a lot about how early trauma can impact our hopes and our dreams and what children believe they can do. And this is why it's so important that children see themselves represented in the TV shows and the media. They see idols that they can aspire to. Anybody ever heard of the Mulder Complex or the Scully Complex, right? You guys remember the X-Files, right? Yeah? Well, Scully, right? She's the female doctor, right? When she was on TV, there was like a 70% increase in females going into the sciences. Because they saw that that was a possibility for them, right? Even how we hope and dream is influenced through our interactions with our caregivers and the people that we have a relationship with. So this little boy grows up, he's experiencing danger, he adapts appropriately. You guys said he's really good at hiding and running, shutting down, fighting, responding quickly to danger. He goes and wants to get a job. Where is he going to have a really good time finding employment in our society today?
The Army.
The Army. What else? Firefighters, police, right? Our nurses, right? Because he has adapted well and is going to be really well suited for that environment. What happens if this little boy wants to go into the Marines? What do we do for him? Boot camp. Yeah, right? And is boot camp like this, right? This is a PowerPoint, this is a gun, and this is you holding a gun, and then you're going to shoot the gun, right? And here's your gun, right? Is that what boot camp looks like? No, because we know that this is the absolute worst way to learn any information, right? You guys are engaged in the worst possible way to learn information. Because it turns out, we as humans, how do we learn? By doing, getting up and doing, right? We talk about how important it is for children to play. They're really starting to explore educationally how just letting kids play with things like Legos, they learn math better, right? Because we learn by doing. And boot camp, the other really important thing, other than just also getting up and physically acting it out and modeling it and practicing it, the other thing that's really crucial to being able to learn in that environment is safety. Right? Yes, accidents happen at boot camp, but for the most part, right, it's a safe environment where you're simulating war and you know that you're not going to die when you go out there. Right? Safety is crucial to being able to learn. My question for us right now is, where is the boot camp for little boys and girls who have adapted appropriately to danger? Where is the boot camp for them to learn these skills in our community? A hands-on place where they are modeled relationships and emotions and how to interact with others. Right? I'd argue that really the only place that we may have something like this is our foster care system. And if you guys have foster parents that are members of your congregation, please support them with everything you can, because they are amazing, amazing people. And if you don't, maybe that's a way that we could explore how do we take this to the next level. Because if we looked at the research and we looked at the impact for kids that have, and you know, I'm sure you guys have several schools right around you right here, right? And what happens when those kids end up in foster care? The majority of the time they have to change schools. And it is huge to keep them connected to this, to their community. Their education does better. They're more likely to return successfully home to their parents when they stay close to home and close to their community. Yeah?
There's, I think, kind of an urban myth that sports can solve a lot of this. And do you have any feel for the relative effectiveness? I mean, there are some real success stories out there.
Yeah.
But they're, you know, they're anecdotal and they're stunning. But as a major component, how do you think that it works?
Well, what do you guys think? What do you think? What could be of value from this perspective about a sports program? What? Teamwork.
Discipline.
Discipline.
Trust.
Trust. Structure.
Commitment.
Routine. Right? Absolutely. There's a lot of inherent value in sports. I think where we run into issues is when we come to this mental model. And there's a lot of work right now in the sports, specifically the NFL. I hosted a conference here nationally focused on how do they talk about women during those sports teams, right? Because when we're saying you throw like a girl, right? That is that sort of mental model that influences boys to think that they're different and better than girls. And that there's some power dynamic there, right? So some coaches are really, really looking at this, and there's a Coaching Men into Boys program. It's a national program doing a phenomenal job of focusing on that, knowing that the relationships between the coach and between the players is the most important thing that they're offering. And these life skills, the structure, the commitment, the finishing something you start, right? All of those things, that's what they're teaching them. And the score at the end of the game, that's just something that happens, right? But if they focus on that, turns out, yes, they do better and they're more competitive, but lifelong they have better outcomes. And so there's a growing movement within our sports programs to do that. So yeah, I think there's an awesome opportunity there. But it's based on what is the intention of the coach who's running it, and what does that look like. Okay, so where we run into issues, right, is when our adaptations, the way that we have neurologically adapted to our environment, collides with our social expectations. So when this little boy here goes into school, right, he's adapted well to his environment. And then he's expected to stand in line, wait his turn, ask first for sharing the crayons, right? This is a social experiment. How you guys doing sharing your crayons, right? Right? Some of you doing better than others, right? No, I'm just kidding. See, and that's where we run into issues. Because our assumption is everybody is getting these skills built into them in their home environments, right? And when we acknowledge that behaviors have meanings and meet a need, then maybe the way that we intervene changes. So we're going to go into a little, let me see where I'm at on mine. We're going to do a couple more slides and then we're going to do an activity. Okay, so when we're thinking about the impacts of trauma on our brain development, there's three really, really critical things we need to understand. The first is the kind of maltreatment matters. So whether a child experiences physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, that matters. The sex or gender of a child, whether they're male or female, matters. It turns out, I don't want to startle you guys, but there are differences between men and women. Okay? Alright? And I'm not the only one who thinks this, right? The doctors at Harvard University have finally told us that there are differences. So now we can rest. We can sleep tonight, right? Finally. And then the other thing that matters is our age. How old we are when we have these experiences. Whether we're 6 months old or 16 when we experience physical abuse. And so we're going to pull into one of those a little bit deeper. So why would it matter how old we are when we have a negative experience or when we have an adverse childhood experience? Longer to live with it?
Resiliency.
Resiliency. Tell me a little bit more.
Well, if you're going along for a certain period and all is well, and then all of a sudden you have a dip, because of the high parts in your life, you are able to cope better with the dip and know that things will get better. But if you've always been down at the bottom, you don't have that resiliency to bounce back.
Beautiful. Yes. Absolutely, right? Your access to resources, both internal and external, is different based on your age, right? If you're 6 years old and there's domestic violence in your home, your ability to do one of these things, right? We talked about that these are survival mechanisms. Your ability to hide, run, fight is much different at 6 years old than at 6 months or at 3 months, right? The other thing to understand is that our brain grows sequentially and it's experience dependent. So there's sensitive periods when we naturally develop the skills and talents and traits that we need if we have those experiences, right? And then my last presentation I talked about this where, during the toddler years, if we're talking to them, reading them books, they learn to speak, right? And during elementary school, right, if we're offering them opportunities to solve complex problems, they start to learn how to do mathematics and that sort of stuff, right? If we're giving them those experiences. One of the systems in our brain that is heavily impacted by abuse and neglect is called the limbic system. Did I share with you guys the hand model of the brain last time? Okay, so this is a fun little thing. You guys can even teach this to children. There's a YouTube video online if you look up hand model of the brain. So this is the brain stem. This is the bottom of our brain. The reptilian brain regulates our, blood pressure, right? Then this is our limbic system right here. So it's made up of our hippocampus and our amygdala. It's our fight or flight or fleas, right? Another way of thinking of this is a meerkat. You guys know the image of the meerkat? They're the ones that sit up on all hinds at the colony looking out, right? What does the meerkat do when there's a leaf that rustles, right? Alerts the herd, everybody goes underground, right? This guy is not the one we want making financial decisions in our life, right? That guy, no, that is not the one we want making good decisions in our life, because he's not capable of it, right? He responds immediately to anything he perceives as dangerous, alerting the herd, ow, let's all freak out, right? Then over the top here is what we call our corpus callosum, or cortex. Specifically right here, the two middle fingers right there, that's right behind your eyebrows. That's your prefrontal cortex. This is the command center of your brain. This is the guy who is keeping your emotional outburst in check right now. So thank your prefrontal cortex if you're just ready to scream. It's doing its job, right? Well, what happens when we become emotionally charged? We flip our lid, right? And we react from a point here. Our meerkat brain takes over, and we're reacting like that, right? Well, there's things that we can do that re-engage this part of our brain. Building resiliency, reflection does an exceptional job at engaging this part of our brain and helping us process that information in a different way. Real quickly, I had this client I was working with. This kid was in foster care, was having visits sporadically with his mom, would have horrible behavioral outbursts after visits with his mom. Just couldn't handle it. His therapist, well, he happened to love math. Loved doing math. His little 1 + 2, right? That got him excited. So, his therapist suggested, well, on your way back from visits with mom, told the foster parent, why don't you try having Johnny do some math problems, right? So he's talking about how his visit with his mom, and he's doing math. Well, it turns out this part of the brain can't do math, right? Even simple math. So by having him just talk about math problems while he's talking about his mom, it engages a different part of our brain. And that's what we mean when we talk about reflection. So when you take a deep breath and count to 10, you're forcing your brain to process the stimulus through a different part of your brain. You're forcing this part of your brain to engage. Deep breathing, mindfulness practices, right? Stretching, right? Body movement, you can't move your body without this part of your brain being activated. Because your brain, the right side of your brain controls the left side of your body, left side of your brain controls the right side of your body, right? So all of you guys who are coloring right now, you are building those neural connections. Great work, right? And it's simple things like that, where you could sit there and color and still talk through a traumatic incident in your life, and your brain is processing it using different connections. So this part of our brain is vital for relationships. It regulates our panic and fear, our attention, our memory, and our social cues. It helps us make meaning from social cues and even from language, right? And this part of our brain is especially susceptible to any kind of maltreatment during those first 3 years of life. So when they say those first 5 to 6 years of life are the most important for brain development, they're right? Those are the biggest building blocks are happening during those years. And it's also susceptible to sexual abuse through age 5. But the impacts that abuse and neglect may have on this part of our brain may not be seen until 9 or 10 years later, until we enter puberty. Because there's little bitty cells called granule cells or seedling cells inside our hippocampus that are programmed to develop and grow when we hit puberty, helping us, again, regulate our hormones, our mood, our heartbeat, and our sexual behavior. Anybody here know a teenager who seems to struggle profoundly with regulating their hormones or mood? Right? Yeah! That's because that part of the brain hasn't fully developed yet, right? So they're not supposed to be able to regulate that really well. But for children who've experienced this, those seedling cells can actually die. The toxic stress that we talk about, where stress that lasts longer than 20 minutes, repeated exposure to things like domestic violence, physical abuse, sexual abuse, right? Those can damage those seedling cells and actually kill them. So that when our brain is ready, and this part of our brain is supposed to grow and expand during puberty, those seedling cells aren't there to grow. Influencing our ability to regulate panic and fear, our attention, our memory, and our response to social cues. Do you have any teenagers in your life you know who seem to respond totally inappropriately to a social cue? Right? So it's not just about asking what's going on right now in the life of a child, but really, again, back to this idea of empathic curiosity. Really wanting to know what's happened in the life of that child. Right? And how can we now support them? Another area of our brain that is impacted profoundly by trauma experiences is the cerebellar vermis. So this is the seat of our brain. It has a relationship with essentially every type of mental health issue that we can think of. They're seeing predictive changes to this part of the brain based on trauma exposure in everything from chronic depression to schizophrenia. They see changes and adaptations in this part of the brain. This part of the brain is the part of our brain that brings in the peripheral information right now in our environment, right? So you're walking down the road and you see a group of strangers across the street. Your brain is filtering in whether that's a fearful thing or not, right? Whether we need to pay attention to that or not. Well, actually, how much the width of our peripheral vision is dependent upon this cerebellar vermis. And when we experience lots of trauma and neglect, our peripheral vision actually decreases. Because we can't focus on all of that. Our brain can't handle all of that stimulus, so we focus it in because we're growing up in a dangerous place where danger is always coming at us, and we've got to be ready to respond to what's directly in front of us. Right? So we actually see adaptive changes. And it's good for us at an individual level for survival, but you can see how that change and adaptation could have issues when this little boy walks into the classroom. What is that going to look like? What are we going to call that in the classroom setting? ADD, ADHD, right? There is lots of growing research recognizing that we misdiagnose post-traumatic stress disorder in children and call it ADHD, right? There's tons of growing research recognizing that PTSD looks vastly different between children and adults. And for way too long, we've been using the criteria for adults on children. Now we're recognizing that we see these changes in attention, perception, their ability to regulate their positive feelings, right? So if you're struggling to have, if your brain has adapted appropriately to the experiences of danger that you had to help you survive, but then you're struggling to pay attention in a school setting, your perception is off when it comes to social cues and things like that, and you have difficulty with positive feelings, it's easy to see how maybe that individual would turn to substances to help them cope, right? Another part of our brain, again, you guys asked for this, remember, at least half of you asked for more on neuroscience, okay? So the rest of you, blame them, all right? One more part of our brain is the corpus callosum, and I talked a little bit about this. This is the superhighway of our brain. Right side controls the left side of our body, left side of our brain controls the right side of our body. So for us to do story problems, complex tasks in our life, it requires cross-brain communication. It turns out we already know what works good for building this part of our brain. The arts, music, dancing, right? Because it requires physical body movement, rhythm, listening, right? And it's requiring these two parts of our brain to work together. This part of the brain is especially susceptible for boys to neglect. So for boys birth to 3 who experience neglect, and neglect is essentially not having the experiences. When we were talking about these, there are sensitive periods when we have those experiences that we need, our brain adapts and helps us develop these skills and talents. Neglect is not having the experiences that your brain needs for you to be able to develop those skills and talents. If you guys remember the Russian or Romanian orphanage research from years ago, right, where their physical needs were tended to, they had a bottle, they changed their diapers, right, but these hundreds of infants were just left in cribs without human connection and contact, and they were actually dying. It was causing them to die, right, because that is an essential part of our life, that human connection, right? So neglect, and then for sexual abuse for women ages 9 to 10, impacts this corpus callosum and their ability to process information. And I had a woman share with me yesterday some information about when we're thinking about the impacts of drug use when parents are pregnant, fetal alcohol use really damages the corpus callosum and the connections in that part of the brain, making it very difficult for people with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, FASD, FAS, to do things like math. Right? And that's because this part of the brain has been impacted by those early experiences, again, all the way going back to in utero. And then, I think I shared this last time, but I want to just remind us, is that there's a continuum when it comes to stress. There's positive stress, or growth promoting. And growth promoting stress is the stress that I was under driving my car here this morning, right? Getting this PowerPoint presentation put together. Wouldn't have got it done without positive stress, right? At the other end is toxic stress, and that's what we were just talking about. Toxic stress is these stressful experiences that are lasting more than 20 minutes at a time or happening repeatedly in our environment, and it starts to damage the connections in our brain and influence our brains and bodies. And somewhere in the middle here is tolerable. And what is tolerable for this fine gentleman might be entirely different for me, right? It could be a minor disruption in his life, and it could be a total catastrophe in mine. And that's because our individual set points for what is stressful are different, right? And this woman over here shared it, right, is that a big part of that is based on our resiliency, right? I get a flat tire on my way here this morning. Whether that's a tolerable event or a toxic and really, really damaging event in my life is dependent upon my resiliency. My resiliency is made up of both my internal experiences. So, have I experienced something like this before? Do I know how to overcome it, right? Does my life story, does that voice inside my head say, you know what, you've overcome things before, you can get through this? Or does my internal voice say, oh, yeah, this is your life, isn't it? Everything bad happens to you. This is another thing that you won't be able to get over because you're a loser, right? That matters. The other part is, do I actually have resources outside of myself? So if I pull out my cell phone, if I have a cell phone, and I have cell phone service, right? If I pull it out, do I have a number that I can call and someone will actually come and help me, right? That matters. That determines whether this is a tolerable event in my life or whether it's a toxic event in my life, right? So, we're gonna stop here and do an activity to give you guys a break from listening to me. But we do have a collective choice. We may not be able to identify before the first adverse childhood experience happens in the life of a child. We may not be able to identify before the second happens in the life of a child. But by paying attention as a community, by having empathic curiosity about the people that we are in connection with in our lives, we can definitely recognize before there's 3 or 4 or 5 in the life of a child. And we can intervene. And by stopping it from going to 7 or 8, we can improve the lifelong health for that individual. Right? So we're going to do a fun little activity here at your tables for a couple of minutes, looking at trying to make this brain science that Kody's been rattling on about mean something to us, right? So we adapt the behaviors and characteristics that help us survive. So what are some behaviors that we see in our community right now that are maybe a little challenging for us to deal with?
Street corner begging.
Begging, sure. Homelessness?
The traffic trying to get across town with that bridge being closed.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I'm not sure how that relates at all, but I like that.
Drug addiction and abuse.
Drug addiction, yep. So I'm thinking also about the behaviors, right? So what are some of the behaviors that we see in our society, or if we're focused on kids, right? What are some of the behaviors in children that are difficult to parent?
Bullying.
Bullying,
Absenteeism.
just not being there.
Yeah.
Anybody else experience any children who are fighting, biting, anything like that? Maybe? This activity only works if you guys give me stuff that I need, right? So I'm gonna have to just make them up here, right?
Emotional dysregulation.
Sure, what is that, Sandy?
So I said emotional dysregulation, outbursts, temper tantrums,
Outbursts.
a lot of anger, not being able to control your feelings.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Yeah, we're going to use tantrums because that one works well for my activity. So, anybody else here parenting somebody got a tantrum? Go ahead.
Entitlement.
Entitlement, absolutely. There's a hand up back there. Sorry. Go ahead.
Lack of dynamic thinking. So any big changes in your world, everything shuts down right away. Real static kind of thinking.
That lack of options or thinking, limited worldview. Okay, yeah.
Well,
Suicide? Sure.
Impulsiveness.
Impulsive, all right.
yeah, inappropriate behavior, acting things out that
Okay.
are not good for kids.
Wonderful. All right, so we're gonna take one of these activities and we're gonna think about it with regards to it meeting our needs, our basic needs. Okay? So let's use tantrums because that's easy. But you guys can think about how these other behaviors might also work. So you got a kid in your household or in your life who's throwing really, really big tantrums, right? What needs might be met by their behavior? What are they getting by throwing that? Attention. Attention. What else?
Their understanding.
Listening.
Listening. So some sort of communication, maybe.
They're getting whatever's happening to shut down immediately.
So they're getting some sort of power in that situation, right? Or some sort of control. Anybody here ever thrown a good 2-minute tantrum on their own? Right? In the group home, right? We would sometimes just, when you're at your wits' end with this kid, you just, depending on your relationship with them, we lay down next to them and they're throwing a tantrum, you throw a tantrum with them, right? To try and help them recognize how silly it was, right? It is absolutely exhausting, right? You can stop your whole 90-minute workout, just throw a good 3-minute tantrum, kick and scream the ground, you're done, right? So it at a fundamental level really gets out our stress, the stress release, right? So when we recognize that that we adapt to the behaviors that meet our needs, right? We all have these fundamental needs. Anybody here willing to give up all their power in life? Anybody willing to give up all their attention? Right? No. So the issue isn't these fundamental needs. We all have them. But what's going on for this little boy or this little girl is that they've got a super highway in their brain. When they need or want power in a situation, they throw a tantrum. Because that works. In their environment, their repeated experiences in their environment tell them, when I need power, when I want control, I throw a tantrum. Right? They may also have the neurological skill to talk about their feelings. Right? But what do they have for talking about feelings? They've got an old country road, neurologically, connecting when they want power in a situation or when they want attention, they talk. Right? Because in their environment, their repeated experiences tell them that talking doesn't get their needs met. Talking doesn't get them the attention that they need, but tantrum sure does. Right? So at our tables here, we're going to try and make this information real. So I want you to take either one of these behaviors, either you guys can focus on tantrums or choose another behavior that you want to. And talk about, okay, right now, let's imagine, and you're going to choose a behavior and one of the needs. Sometimes it's meeting multiple needs, but for the sake of this exercise, let's say you take tantrums and power. And then you're going to talk about how would you give a child other ways of gaining power in that situation rather than throwing a tantrum. What are acceptable, less disruptive ways that you could empower a child to find power in that situation without throwing a tantrum, right? And so, if another group wants to take fighting and stress release, so a kid, if you think that they're fighting because they just need to get this energy out, then how do we offer them other ways to get that energy out that doesn't involve fighting? Does that make sense for everybody? So you're going to quickly choose one of these and a related need that you guys want to talk about, and we're going to spend about 5 minutes on this. Okay, so we don't have a lot of time, so you guys got to get moving and make decisions quickly. Okay? Conversation feel like you didn't have answers. Okay. Did it feel a little bit different than if I had asked you if I started off the conversation just saying that kids are fighting and throwing a tantrum and you need to stop it, right? Did it feel different when you were talking about that there was a need that the behavior was meeting and you were trying to give the child a different way to meet that need? Did that conversation feel a little bit different? So the reason why I did that, yeah.
Well, just that, and we were talking that the center section is our coping mechanisms for something that happened before. And so what we're trying to decide when we were talking was how do you change, I assume that's where you're going, but how do you change that to behavior? And that's more difficult. It's one thing to stop a fight. You have two kids fighting, you send them to separate rooms, but it's harder to understand why they react that way in the first place.
Mm-hmm. And I might have not introduced the activity the best way, but I didn't say a kid is throwing a tantrum right now, how do you intervene, right? I was saying if you believe a kid is throwing a tantrum to get attention, what are other ways that you could give that child to find attention in your environment rather than throwing attention, right? Because in the moment, you still have to intervene. You still have to stop the kids from fighting, right? But so much of this is about how do we create structure, routine, consistency, opportunities for children to have power, attention, right? In your relationships with them that are more appropriate, if you will, or are less disruptive to the entire environment. And the same goes for our adults, right? The same goes for our colleagues who show up late to work, right? If we start to acknowledge that maybe there's something that behavior is, maybe that behavior is meeting a need for them, maybe there's something going on there, right? Then maybe there's another way that we can support them, and that changes our thinking, right? And the reason why I did this activity, because I know you guys wanted to talk more about resiliency, and I'm going to give you a couple of things about resiliency, but what you're going to find is that it's all about shifting how we think, because it opens up new opportunities and possibilities. For example, there's a school, a high school, Walla Walla High School, or Lincoln High School in Walla Walla, did this. After being exposed to this information and research, right? There was no one who came from Harvard and told them, now do this, right? What they did was they realized, hey, some people, it's hard for them to make good decisions when they're emotionally charged, when they flip their lid. So maybe we need to give everybody, both the child and the teacher, an opportunity to calm down before we make decisions about discipline. So they instituted this. Very, very simple. Both the kid and the teacher involved in the incident had to point on the target. Are they ready to talk? Do they need to wait an hour? Or do they need to wait a day? What happened? Their suspensions dropped by 85%. This is what they did, right? So it's really about shifting how we look at the situation, how we understand it. Then we open up all kinds of new opportunities like this one. We don't have enough time here to go through the ACE study, but we talked about it before. And what was so important about the ACE study was that until the ACE study, doctors were looking at our health risk behaviors, drive our disease risk, and drive us to early death. That was the issue. But from this lens, from this mental model, they realized there was something happening way before people started finding these behaviors as a way of coping. Right? In my last presentation, I talked about the impacts of nicotine on our brain, the impacts of foods high in fat and sugar on our brain. Right? Well, it turns out when we think about those as coping mechanisms, in addition to a health risk behavior, it changes how we work with that client. It changes how we can intervene. It opens up new possibilities when we recognize this. Because then we focus on offering new experiences rather than telling people that there's something wrong with them and we have to fix them. We focus on offering them new experiences so that they can heal themselves. So again, we know that ACEs are common and that they're highly interrelated. In fact, 87% of the time when there's one ACE in the life of a child, there's another ACE in the life of a child. And again, this is from that first 17,000 predominantly white, highly educated people. This is what we saw, is that 33% had 0 ACEs. The vast majority of people had experienced at least one of these adverse, toxic experiences in their life. And that as the number of experiences increased, so did their health risk concerns. Right? So this is a way of us understanding that toxic stress dose on our brains. And there's this dose-response connection. So as our toxic stress dose increases, the likelihood we're going to develop health problems increases as well. And I know I'm rushing through this stuff, guys, but all of this is available online. I have some web resources that you can look at. And this is really, the important part is shifting how we think. When we start to think about this, and I know some of you are right now doing your own self-diagnosis, your ACE scores, and right? I hope 2 things are happening there. First, that you have an increased sense of compassion for yourself, right? And that you're shifting this mental model that there's something wrong with you, that you're damaged and broken, right? The way that we talk about, that you're shifting that a little bit and saying, you know what, it's not me, right? My brain responded the way it should have to my experiences that I had, and that I'm always capable of changing, right? And I'm always capable of learning new skills and adapting. So hopefully you have a little bit of self-compassion there. And the other thing to realize is what the woman over here shared again, right, is that this, an ACE score doesn't take into account our resiliency, right? So we don't know how old you were when you experienced that, and an ACE score at an individual level doesn't mean anything. Whether I tell you I have an ACE score of 4 or 0 doesn't tell you anything about me. You don't know the traumatic experience I had, right? And you don't know how old I was when I had that, and you don't know the positive things that I had in my life to help counteract that. But we do know that when we increase our ACEs, our health problems increase, as do all of these health and social problems in our life. So on this slide, the important thing to take away is that even people with an ACE score of 0, they still have trouble, they still have challenges in their life. They average 1.5 of these 18 problems with an ACE score of 0, right? So maybe they're having some problems with anger and they have some high stress in their life. But for people with an ACE score of 7 or 8, on average they have 4.5 of those challenges every day, right? What does getting up and going to work look like when you're struggling with 4 of these issues? What does parenting look like when you're struggling with 4 to 5 of those issues? Right? So then we start to understand, hopefully build some compassion, both for the adults and for the children growing up in these environments. And if we build our compassion for the adults that are parenting those kids, and we intervene and offer community and support, we can help to reduce the impact of ACEs in the lives of the children right now, and impact and build the resiliency for the adults that are supporting them. And as we reduce ACEs in our community, so 3, 2, 1, right, as we work to prevent ACEs in the next generation, we're also preventing homelessness, unemployment, incarceration. We're reducing the disability, we're reducing learning problems, and we're reducing poverty in our community. We know that they're all connected. And we may not get to 0, but again, that same dose response, right? By reducing our ACE scores in our community from 3 on average to 2 on average has a profound impact on lifelong health and prosperity for our community. So I'm going to end with just a couple of things on resiliency, because I know we're out of time here. But what every community that has looked at this information has done is they have come together, talked about this information, and then started thinking about what can we do with this information. In Walla Walla, they developed this deck of cards for children to have a conversation with them about ACEs, but more importantly, about building resiliency. What can we do that helps you? Right? And this is community experts that just came together, started working with them and talking through this information. The sanctuary model, this is wonderful, right? We start thinking about when we recognize that relationships are important and that safety is critical for our learning, then we start to focus on all levels of safety. Safety emotionally, safety morally, meaning that we're free from having to make decisions that we don't agree with, right? Do things that don't fit with our moral beliefs. Physical safety, right? Being in a safe environment. So we can influence how we support each other when we focus on safety and recognize that safety is paramount for us all learning and connecting. And the last thing I'm going to end with is this idea, right? Is that in Jefferson County, they started recognizing that when kids are unsafe at home, when they go to school, and remember I was talking about that suspension rate, right? And they're suspended from school because their behaviors are getting them in trouble, they're unsafe, we can't manage them here, so we send them home, right? Should it be surprising that this is where we welcome them? And that that's where most of them end up? The biggest predictor of incarceration for an adult is the age that that individual was removed from an educational establishment, right? For most of our adults that are incarcerated right now, they were kicked out of a daycare setting or a kindergarten setting, right? So maybe we don't have compassion for them as adults, but hopefully we all still have compassion for them when they're 5 years old, and maybe we can figure out a different way to intervene at 5 and at 3 in that daycare setting to give them a safe place, a safe boot camp, to build the ability to communicate their feelings, to have relationships, so that they don't end up on this journey. Thank you guys so much for the opportunity.
Kody, thank you for this. I want to just say to everyone, a big reason why I wanted us to hear this is to get us thinking. What is this for? Sorry.
Just make sure they sign in.
Sure. Yeah, if you can.
Okay, sign in at your table. So, really, I know we're late, but just give me 30 seconds of your focus. I believe that this information can get us dreaming and thinking as the body of Christ. One, what we can do in our own individual lives, but also what we can do as a community to build resiliency in not only the kids in our community, in our congregation, but in our surrounding community. We're called to let our light shine, and I don't know what the outcome might be, but I trust you to ponder and think, send me emails. Pastor Bill, couldn't we do this? Pastor Jonathan, what about this? Pastor Paula, Randy as president of our congregation, Tim Quigley as social concerns person on the council. Have we thought about doing this? I want what we've received these last 2 weeks to give us some dreaming and thinking, and we may have another forum like this where I can just simply sit down and say, okay, what might we do? And so I want you to know that's where I'm coming from. That was one reason I really wanted Kody here to present this. I'm really fascinated by it, and I think it's tremendously helpful for us. So again, thank you, Kody, for being with us. Go in peace, serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God.